of course, you should be checking in with your instructors. And just by the way, the quiz, not available yet, will be available this evening. It will be open for a week. It will be based on the content from Nicole's lecture, but also on the podcast for which she won the award. And I guess I should start now.
Yeah, we're good.
All good. Okay. Test. Can you hear me? You can. I can tell you can hear me. I want to do a land acknowledgement again. I know we did it at the start of the term, but this is a special event, and I'll begin a little bit. I'll do the land acknowledgement first, and I'll tell a little bit of a story. So, you've heard this all before. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I actually sent Nicole's podcast, which is basically about falsifiable race science, to someone who had been sending emails to the school, to the department, actually all around the university, objecting to the name change. The reason I bring this up is because I took a long time to argue with this person, even though I knew I wasn't going to convince them. But this is the kind of work we all need to do. So when I say this land acknowledgement, I usually try to talk about action, and sometimes action is simply voicing, right? Sometimes it needs to be done. Yeah, I don't think I made an impact on that person, but I voiced. Now, we'll formally start I've lost my intro here, sorry. Got my intro to Nicole. I want to first thank the American Association for the Advancement of Science and its sponsor, the Kavli Foundation, for today's AAS Kavli Science Journalism Award lecture. Our speaker, Nicole Mortillaro, is a senior reporter for science at the CBC, where she covers primarily astronomy, space science, and climate change. She is an avid amateur astronomer and editor of the Journal of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. Nicole is also the author of 13 books on topics ranging from the weather to space, and of course hockey as well. Nicole and her colleague Amanda Buckowitz won the 2021 AAAS Kavli Science Journalism Award for the CBC podcast episode on quirks and quarks called Black in Science, and I will be sending you to the link so you can all listen to this before your quiz, by the way. They examined the history of biased and falsifiable race science that led to misunderstanding and mistreatment of Black people by the scientific and medical community, creating obstacles for them to participate in the scientific process in all kinds of ways. Nicole will speak today on a pathway into science journalism, building trust and breaking barriers. With that, I would like to welcome Nicole, and you should too. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Move up a little bit.
Get that around the side there.
Perfect. Thank you. So first off, I want to say thank you so much for having me here. It's incredible to be back here after 30 years. and TMU holds a lot of really special memories for me. I did some walking around here today, and there's nothing like doing that to make yourself feel old, because so many things have changed, and actually some of the things I reference in my talk no longer here. So I wanted to start off by talking about my career path, because it's been an odd one. I often say that it's not, rarely is your career path linear. I mean, there are, twists and turns, and it might take you a while to get to where you are going or where you want to go. And so that is certainly has been the case for me. I decided I wanted to become a journalist, just a journalist, when I was 15. I was really fortunate to be one of the kids who actually knew what she wanted to do. And this happened after I took one of these career courses, in high school. So I took every English class I could, and I ended up graduating with 10 English credits in high school, because I just knew that this was what I wanted to do, period. So I applied to the typical 3 universities. I got in, but I knew that I wanted to come to TMU. For one, it was in the heart of my city, and it had the best journalism program. So, though, while I loved writing, I was not exactly the best student. So much so that 30 years ago this year, I was kicked out of TMU. I was put on academic suspension. It's a long story that involves the now very different Journalism Lounge being very immature and playing a lot of euchre, not attending my elective classes. But it turns out that was the best thing that ever happened to me. I wouldn't advise going that path, but it was absolutely, it changed my life. So I fought really hard to get back in, because you weren't guaranteed. Once you were put on academic suspension, you had to basically reapply. So I had to take other courses, show that I was serious about coming back. One of the things, I don't know how it works here now, but back then in the 90s, it was that you had your 3 streams, in magazine, broadcast, and print. And I had wanted to go into magazine. I liked writing long form, and I also liked copy editing. That was a big thing for me. But because I was put on academic suspension, I wasn't allowed to go into the magazine stream. Preference was given to the students from the following year. So that was okay to me. I thought, what, print is fine. But when I came back, a lot had changed. For one, I was introduced to, I remember sitting in the Journalism Lounge and someone talking about the World Wide Web. And I was like, what is that? Yeah, exactly. Like, I had no idea what the internet was. And if that doesn't age me. And I discovered when I walked today, where I guess on the record is, and part of the Journalism Lounge is, that used to be like a library with computers, and also the newsroom for the Ryerson. And I remember going into that computer lab thing and just being amazed at being able to talk to people around the world. And this is like before there were images or anything like that. And so I was amazed, but I was saying to Gavin that one of the things that our profs were talking about was how our news consumption was going to change. And they said, from now on, people will be reading their news on the internet. And I refused to believe it. I said, there's no way. There's absolutely no way I will ever read anything on a computer. And I loved the smell of the newspapers when I got them, the magazines. Absolutely no way. Here I am. When I was in the print stream, in that newsroom, we had a television. And that television broadcast, we normally had it on the Discovery Channel, back when the Discovery Channel actually played aired science programs. And at that point, I had decided I wanted to become a copy editor. But watching Discovery, there was a particular program, and it was called Daily Planet, unfortunately no longer around. And I saw Ivan Semeniuk, who was talking about science. And right then and there, I knew that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to become a science journalist. I loved astronomy. I loved it since I was very young. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to tell people about the world around us. And so I was given, I'll tell you something that I learned recently. I was given permission to start a science beat for the paper. My first interview, I believe, was with Ivan, who today is a science reporter for the Globe and Mail. And my second interview was with Dr. Roberta Bondar, the astronaut, first Canadian female astronaut and neurologist in space, and her work here at the university. I believe she was doing something on bone density at the time. And that was so intimidating to me. I mean, here I was meeting my, one of my idols. But I wanted to add that on Thursday, I found out that I had an asteroid named after me, along with Ivan, actually. It was kind of neat to see. I was sent the notification from someone, and it had my asteroid, and right below was Semeniuk. And I can't tell you how moved I was, and to have that happen. And I've told Ivan so many times that he's been a great inspiration to me. So that was a wonderful thing to have happen recently. So after I graduated, this thing is really sensitive. After I graduated, I worked odd jobs before finally becoming a copy editor at a publishing company. I was laid off while on maternity leave, which can happen. So in certain situations, before I landed a job as an editor at Scholastic Canada. I'm sure you guys remember the book fairs and all that. And while I liked it for a while, it didn't give me that fast pace that I really wanted, what I felt that I really needed, because you work on books for a year or more, and it's a long process. However, I did end up publishing my first 2 books on weather for kids, so that was amazing. But I really wanted to go back to where I started. After 20 years, I decided I wanted to become a science journalist. So at the time, I had joined the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, and I decided to write some content for the website, along with another website. And then a job opened at Global News, and it was for a science and environment and weather reporter. And because I was also, that's another obsession of mine, weather, especially severe weather, I got the job. After 20 years of not being anywhere near, a newspaper or a magazine, I was able to get the job that I wanted. However, like I said, not a straight path. Unfortunately, Global decided to kill the science beat, and I was absolutely gutted, devastated. I didn't want to write general news. I wanted to write about science. And then a mat leave position came up at CBC. But I was a single parent, and the idea of leaving a somewhat stable job to go to a 1-year contract terrified me. But I was really passionate about science, and I decided to take the leap. So my colleague, Emily Chung, who I'd filled in for while she was on mat leave, is a great reporter. She has a PhD in chemistry. I mean, I thought, how can I beat that? I mean, so I knew that I needed to make my stories, my coverage stand out separate from hers. It turns out that people really like space. People really like astronomy. They like learning about all of that. So one of the things, a little bit on the side, is I hated being on TV. When we had to do the broadcast, part here at TMU, you had to do every role. I don't know if you still have to do that, but I left anchor was the very last one I did because I was terrified. So with that in mind, it was really interesting because while at CBC, it was 2017, and 2017 had the Great American Eclipse. And I pitched it and I said, look, this is going to be a big thing. People are going to, want to see this. And they said, okay, great. Okay, you're going to go down to Missouri and you're going to do the TV hits and YouTube hit, the streaming stuff, all that. And I was like, I have zero broadcast experience and I hate being on camera. And they're like, you'll be fine. So it was a terrifying experience for me, but it was also amazing. Being out in the field was something that's what I wanted to do when I was here. Now, thanks to the internet, there's a lot of sitting at your desk and reporting from there, conducting interviews via, now Zoom, but phone. And so being out in the field was exhilarating. And so after that, I started doing more TV and radio. And it's funny because I think one of the things that I'm very passionate about the things that I love. So I get very almost a childlike enthusiasm. And I think that's actually what helped me secure a permanent position at CBC, because after Emily came back, after a while, it took a bit, but I did end up becoming a permanent CBC reporter. So, I'm always going about your career. I believe that it's about being open to new things. And, while I'm primarily a digital reporter, so much for saying I wasn't going to read my news on the internet, I do TV and radio, and I think it's great. And it changes things up, which is great. And I think a lot of news organizations are doing that, where you need to do everything. And that's what CBC does. When I left Global, they were trying to do the same thing. You did all platforms. So that was my long and winding road to where I am today. And it's in a job that I absolutely love. And I mean, how many people can say that? I consider myself really fortunate. But part of the reason why I love my job is that I truly love educating the public. Whether it's about the first black hole, picture of a black hole, or Jeremy Hansen being named as the first Canadian astronaut to go around the moon, or climate change. And climate change is something I'm very passionate about. But with that comes a lot of challenges. For one, you have to wade through studies to to find the stories that matter to Canadians. Because, not every study is worthy of a story. And, also asking questions. You don't have to base your coverage on studies, but asking questions, especially when it comes to things like, obviously science, but climate change. But the biggest challenge of all is misinformation, and quite honestly, the vitriol that comes with covering these sorts of stories. I'll give you an example. Just 2 weeks ago, I wrote a story on ship tracks, a digital story. And so historically, ships have been traveling around the globe, specifically around, I'm talking about the North Atlantic and the North Pacific Oceans, and they've been spewing out sulfur particles, pollutants. But what happens is these sulfur particles have formed clouds, and you can see the images. It's just wild. You can see the tracks of the ships. But recently, a study came out led by James Hansen, who was the scientist who sounded the alarm for climate change and global warming back in 1988 when he spoke to Congress. So he led this study that's suggests that the clouds, now that they've restricted these pollutants, so in 2020 there was an international effort to reduce these clouds because they're pollutants, right? But what happened was that the clouds that were reflecting solar radiation back into space were gone, and where's that solar radiation going? Into the oceans. So their study suggested that basically we've been conducting a geoengineering experiment for 100 years without knowing it, and now we might have consequences. Not everybody agrees on it. It's a highly contested study, and that's fine. That's what science is. It's about discussion. So that story, though, I have never received so much email from readers, and I checked on the weekend, it's still going, and I'm going to share a couple with you. So this is one quote. "Perhaps the Earth is warming because we are nearing the end of the Ice Age. Anyone ever think of that?" And then another one, "These pseudoscientists have gone mad. The Earth will regulate itself. There is no climate crisis. Extreme weather events have occurred since the beginning of time. People not prepared for or not skilled for changing weather will not survive, as it has been since the beginning of time. Stop fiddling with the weather, be environmentally responsible, be prepared for extreme weather events, and humanity will carry on as usual." A lot of the emails I received were like that. Those may not seem like anything, because these are the tame ones. I can't share others because of the profanity, and it is extreme profanity and anger. And I've also received death threats. And while I take those seriously, and CBC most certainly does, the emails, the attacks on social media, telling me that, I shouldn't have ever been born, or, do self-harm, I ignore that, because I know what I'm doing. What I'm writing about is fact-based. It's science. It's observations. Now, when I wanted to become a journalist, the media was trusted. And I hate saying the media because of what people use it for now, but that is what we are. It was the only way to get your news, and people watched the evening news nightly, and they trusted their reporters, they trusted their anchors. I loved watching Tom Brokaw, and that was on NBC every night. I never missed a newscast. But of course, now you can get your facts from anywhere. Anybody can say anything on social media and present them as facts. And the other thing is that I find really disheartening is the deep distrust of journalists, and that's been a recent thing, unfortunately. But we as journalists need to present facts. That's our role, and to contradict mis and disinformation, to present them despite the pushback from those who refuse to believe in science. But how? Some believe that we shouldn't, like talking about sending our podcast, to this person. Well, here you go. You're presenting this person with a story with facts. Because there are people who say, is it our job to convince people as journalists? No. I would say no. It is our job to present facts. Because people will push back. They will double down if you try to convince them. And I rarely interact with people online or through email. Some people will actually ask questions and say, okay, I don't understand this. And that's great. And I love speaking with those people because they have an open mind. But unpleasant facts scare people. And I do have some empathy for that, because climate change scares the bejesus out of me. But I can't ignore the facts. I can't ignore what I'm seeing. Looking back at COVID, people became frustrated, very frustrated at the start of the pandemic with what they believed to be contradicting messages. Put on masks. Oh, wait, don't put on masks because it's not going to. In the case where they were talking about both, everybody has to put on masks in order for it to work. But But what people didn't understand was that the science was being discovered at a rapid rate. Epidemiologists were trying to learn as much as they could, as fast as they could. And so that knowledge was evolving. That is science. And that's what some people don't understand, because, they might find, one study might say A, and another study later that looked at that study, oh, well, actually, Z. And that's because they're looking at observations and facts, and it's always developing. That is science. And as an amateur astronomer, I think to myself, oh my God, less than 100 years ago, it'll be 100 years next year, we didn't know about galaxies. It wasn't until 1924 that astronomer Edwin Hubble found, oh, those little fuzzy things are actually other stars, collections of stars. And today we have a deep understanding of our universe, though not complete. And we know that there are around estimated 2 trillion galaxies, and that just evolved over 100 years. And this comes from learning, from asking questions, and looking at the evidence and drawing conclusions. So I think science reporters, such as myself, including health reporters, who need to convey that message to the public. It is not that we are providing fake news, it's that the science is constantly evolving. And I want to say, going back to the vitriol that I was saying, my colleagues in the health unit have taken so much abuse over the past few years about COVID. And it's hard, but it is something that in this day and age is part of being a journalist. And talking about evolving facts, climate change is part of that. People, and actually more so talking about people who are afraid of the facts. Climate change is very real. We know this. But people will reach out and say, well, it's just the natural variability of Earth and our systems. And to some degree, that is true. But it's the pace, the accelerating pace that we're seeing, the climate change, this year is thought, we think, scientists believe that this year could be the hottest year on record, beating out to 2016. And that in part has to do with El Nino. That causes warming the Pacific Ocean, that can cause a warming of global temperatures. However, for the last 3 years before that, we were in La Nina, which is the cooling and can have a cooling effect. And guess what? Every one of those years was still in the top 10. And that's what I try to convey to people as well, that yes, there are absolutely natural variabilities, but that it's fossil fuels that we are pumping into the atmosphere that is accelerating this change. And people don't like hearing it. Like I said, people are afraid of the facts. And I do understand. I mean, look at what we saw this year with the forest fires in the West, in BC, in the North. Unprecedented. And so much of my reporting is unprecedented or record setting. And this is something that most people accept, I would like to say, but a lot of people do have a problem with that. But and then that's the other thing that is I found as a journalist, which is very interesting and disconcerting as well, which is some people will write to you if they've read the whole story, by the way, because a lot of times they'll read the headline or they'll read like the first paragraph and that's it. And they'll and actually it's kind of funny because I've seen people in our comments section like actually call out other people saying, well, you didn't read the story, which I always appreciate. But they think that as journalists that what we're writing about is our opinion. And that's really frustrating sometimes. They don't understand that we're talking to the experts and getting those facts. So one of the biggest challenges is distrust of journalists, and I really hope to see that change. It was the heyday of the 50s and 60s of Walter Cronkite in the 70s, and being trusted means so much. And we don't have agendas. It's laughable. I mean, but that's what people seem to perceive, unfortunately. Now, I'm here today because of the AAAS Cavity Award that myself and my colleague Amanda Buckowitz won in 2021, called Black in Science, and it aired on CBC Radio's Quirks and Quarks. As I mentioned at the start, I'm primarily a digital reporter. Again, still coming back to that, who does occasional radio and TV. I grew up on Quirks and Quarks, a fantastic science program on CBC Radio 1 and on podcast. It's been around for 48 years, and the first host was David Suzuki. Today it's hosted by Bob McDonnell, and he's been at it, I think this is his 31st season. I was approached by the show's producer, who asked if I might be interested in hosting the special, and the special which was Amanda's brainchild. And I definitely was intrigued. I mean, you know, obviously Bob didn't want to speak to it, didn't want to host it because it wasn't his story to tell, and he recognized that. Now, it's very, I'm going to talk about myself a little bit more here, because I want you to understand how special this special was to me. My father, who passed, was Italian, and my mother is Guyanese. But my parents divorced when I was 5 years old, and I lived primarily with my father. And so I really missed out on learning about my Guyanese heritage, which really bothers me. You know, and I regret to this day. You know, it is what it is, and you can only learn from it. But I'm Black. But this kind of living in two worlds was quite challenging, because I didn't see things through the Black lens, the Black experience. I lived in a primarily Italian neighborhood. When I say primarily, it was Italian. And I made excuses as to the way I was treated. You know, it's funny, my daughter's 21, she'll be 21, and even growing up, when I tell her about my experiences, she'd be like, Mom, like, how could you not see that was racially, like, it was based on your race? No, it's, you know. But only recently have I realized that those experiences weren't just kids being mean or people being rude, because I think there were only 3 other Black students in my school. That's it. I was picked on. I was told I was weird. I grew up being teased about my hair, even in high school, and I was put down constantly. I just assumed it was normal, but it really wasn't, you know. I can't share all those things with you. I mean, obviously not everything is based on my race, but, and by the way, I keep saying race because it's a social construct. That is something that we talk about very much in the episode. But my appearance mattered to people, and I didn't understand that. But the first time I experienced overt racism, I was 23 years old, and I was sitting outside of a Blockbuster video, back where I worked when I was younger, and a man walked by, looked at me, and said, and I'm gonna censor myself here, effing monkeys everywhere, and just almost spit it at me. And I was gutted. I couldn't breathe. I was shaking with rage. And then shortly after that, some kid comes in to the store begging for money, and I just overhear the N-word. And he says, oh, N-words, they're so lazy, and laughing. And my actual co-worker started laughing. And this time, though, I stood my ground. I said, get out, just get out. I mean, and by the way, he's asking for money and saying that, you know, I'm lazy. But that was life-changing for me. And some of these, even recent, you know, being approached by police, being accused of stealing in a grocery store. And every time that happens to me, I shake and I and I'm so angry with the way I'm being perceived by people who don't even know me. And I want to go back a little bit. When I was here at TMU, someone wrote an article about the lack of representation in the journalism program, specifically black students. But he didn't mention me as being one of the black students, so I was furious. When that same person approached me to ask me if I would join the newly formed Canadian Association of Black Journalists, I said, no, I'm not gonna. I was mad at him for one. And secondly, because I thought, no, I can do this. I don't want to be part of an association. I want to be able to do it on my own. I was so ignorant and immature. And today, of course, I'm a proud member. But it because of where I grew up, I didn't realize how difficult it would be to be seen, to be heard as a black journalist. So in the meantime, I looked around, and there were I couldn't think of a black science reporter, let alone a female one. And I didn't have anybody who inspired me, who represented me. So I'm so glad that CABJ is around now and is helping elevate those voices. And then going back to the Black in Science special, came full circle for me, because science is supposed to be free of bias. And historically, it hasn't been. It didn't apply to anybody other than white people. So learning how black people were classified as inferior, dating back to the 1700s, was absolutely jaw-dropping to me. And specifically how racist this science was. So Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus classified human beings in his 10th edition of Systema Naturae, published in 1758. And he put humans into several categories, including skin color, behavior, and clothing. The Africanus species, he said, was, and this is a quote, lazy, sly, sluggish, and neglectful. That's how people saw black people, people of color. And it kept going. It didn't end there. In 1839, Samuel George Morton published a book called Crania Americana. It's got another name, but I'll leave that out. Which classified human brains, the measuring the skulls. No surprise, Caucasians had the biggest brains. Indigenous peoples were in the middle, and Negroes had the smallest, and that this directly, he believed, corresponded with our intellectual capacity. And it's sad to say that this didn't end there. That still was taught actually, I think it was 30 years ago. A professor was still trying to teach that. And, black people, we've been considered inferior throughout the ages. Our bodies were put on display in museums. We were told that we didn't feel the same pain as white people, which I actually experienced in my healthcare. We were experimented on without our knowledge. So one of the most disturbing things, and I had never heard of this, which I can't believe I hadn't, but the Tuskegee syphilis study. So it began in 1932. Approximately 400 black men were left untreated for their disease in a US government experiment that went on for 40 years. I mean, this is absolutely mind-blowing that we treated people like this. And that kind of racism has shaped the society we live in today. And I'm sure people have experienced it here. Being treated as inferior, I was told I wasn't smart. She's not that smart. When I was pregnant, I had a guy, an OBGYN, who, when I talked to other women, white women, loved this guy. I went there and he treated me like crap. And to the point I just was like, I don't understand. And when I would talk to like my neighbor who saw him, and she was pregnant at the same time, I was like, no, he's fantastic. With me, he was very dismissive. Why? There was no reason whatsoever. Was that racism? I believe it was. And I was once told by a family friend that I was different. I was about 16. And he said, you're different than most black people because you don't carry a chip on your shoulder. He said that to me. And at the time, I didn't understand. The racism that has existed, that is rooted back in science, so-called science, made people angry. When I worked on this special, I got angry. And people don't understand why Indigenous peoples are angry. People of color all are angry for the way we've been treated. So, going back to the syphilis study, is there any wonder why the black population was slow to adopt the COVID-19 vaccine in other marginalized communities? No, because there's a deep distrust of the institutions. Now, just wrapping up here, but when it comes to our journalism, we need to do better. All of us. We need to bring historically marginalized voices to the stories we write to the forefront. It can be challenging, I'm not going to lie. A lot of times I try to find people, diverse voices for my stories, and they're not there. What does that tell you? It's hard to find. I was asked to speak at a space talk one time, and with other astronomers, professional astronomers, and I was told by the gentleman organizing, he said, it's hard to find black astronomers. I know that. I did a piece on how hard it is to find black astrophysicists. And that's throughout institutions, particularly at the high levels. But they are out there. The experts are out there, and there are actually databases of diverse voices, diverse experts that you can refer to. Sometimes it's frustrating for me, at least, is that I'll contact somebody and they'll refer me to somebody else who's not diverse, and I'm like, no, that's not what I want. But we need to keep that in mind. Diverse voices, LGBTQ, 2S+, we have to bring those voices to the forefront because they've been ignored. And we need to do better, and that includes myself. So anyway, with that, I wanted to thank you for having me here. It has been great to come back to such a great place that holds so many memories for me, and especially since I wasn't a good student. And I'm so happy that I am able to do what I do today, and thanks to TMU and to the journalism program.
Thank you so much. So we do have time for Q&As, and does anybody want to start? What I'm going to do is I'll ask people their question, and then I'm going to revoice it so that it's picked up by the mic and so that everyone hears. But I see one in the first row here, so go ahead.
Oh yeah. So you talked about as like science journalists is necessary to. It's all fact based. It's not opinion. And I'm just wondering how. I mean, obviously you don't need to have a single clear-cut answer, but I'm wondering how we, as journalists, need to balance that with the other portion we talked about, which was not like propagating like racist science. I'm just thinking like the phrenology you were talking about earlier would have been seen as fact, and that would have been fact-based reporting. And I'm wondering what the best way to balance those two factors is.
I'll just repeat it. Yeah, so the question is basically about being a science reporter. How do you challenge bad science? If I put it in a nutshell, is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like as I'm telling you this story, about Carl Linnaeus, I'm thinking, oh, well, that's contradictory, isn't it? But that's more experts. you don't take one person's, view of that. People challenged, people like that and these sorts of findings, but they weren't given the voice. So today, it's about talking to different experts. One of the things, the big thing is finding balance, right? When you're reporting, I write on, ship tracks or whatever about climate change, and then you have another voice that says, hey, you know what? We really don't call that. We don't really believe that to be the case. And one of the challenges that I wanted to bring up too about climate change is that's a unique one, because when I first started reporting on climate change, I was told I had to present the other side, and it was like, there is no other side. It really is happening. And recently being, I don't know, I've got COVID time, so I don't know, 5-6 years ago, that changed, where I think the Guardian might have been one of the first ones of the UK, said that we're not presenting the other side. So that's one of the exceptions, because the science is clear, and that's because there are thousands of scientists who are coming to the same conclusion. But yeah, it's about balance, finding experts on both sides, and giving them the voice too.
Yes. Go ahead.
When I go back to what you were discussing about receiving death threats and some hate mail, things like that you and so many other people are receiving right now, do you think that if media literacy were to be incorporated into school curriculums from a young age, would this change people's view on quote-unquote the media, or how people view your reporting as more fact-based rather than opinion-based? Is it kind of an understanding or a misunderstanding issue?
So the question is in the context of all the hate that journalists receive online through email, and whether the student is asking whether media literacy might be the answer or not. Is that a fair assessment? Okay, go ahead, Nicole.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that should be required, especially in this day and age. And it's about critical thinking. That's the other thing that I think it needs to be done more. When my daughter was young, she was taught critical thinking from a very young age in school, which surprised me, and I was really happy to see that. I don't know if that still goes on, but absolutely I think that media literacy and like I said, just critical thinking needs to be incorporated in our school, in our education system, especially with the social media being what it is.
Does anyone else have one? Because I have one, if you're thinking. Okay, I'll go back for seconds there, but first, I was really intrigued, going back to your career path. I should speak this in here. So going back to your career path, there's this moment where you said you joined the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada,
Yep.
and I know you're interested in that, but it seemed like, obviously you included it because it was like a big moment where you got involved with them and you started doing copywriting. Is that right?
Writing for the web, like writing, yeah.
Yeah. So was that a career step, or was that a hobby step, or did you realize it was both? Or like it's interesting because I haven't joined. I don't think I've ever joined any kind of associations like that. And anyway, I just would like you to elaborate if you could.
Yeah, it was definitely both, but it was. I knew that I had to write. I had to write. If I wanted to become a science reporter, I had to write. And so I wrote for them. I also wrote for another site, and I'm into astrophotography as well, and you can use robotic telescopes from around the world, and I was writing for that as well. But I just knew that I had to start writing. Yes, I had written books, and yes, a lot of hockey books. That's a whole other story. And I knew that I had to write in order to do it, and why not write for something that I loved, about something that I loved so much, and it was science. So that was the reason why.
Did it start with just going to the meetings and meeting people, or did you literally say, I'm signing up and I'm going to start asking to write?
No, I joined. It's an interesting story. The David Dunlap Observatory was up in Richmond Hill, the largest telescope in Canada, was being sold off by U of T. And I just happened to live right around the corner from that, and that's where I first saw Saturn, the first time I looked through a telescope, and I was gutted that was happening. And just by fluke, one day while I walked up there, ridden my bike up there, I heard a car coming up the drive, and that's weird, because it's closed. And it ended up being a gentleman by the name of Paul Mortillaro, and he changed my life, because he convinced me to join the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, because I actually was really intimidated by the RASC. It's got royal in the name, and it sounds very, I don't know as much as these people, and it's not like that at all. It's just a group of people who love the stars, and they provide the journal that I edit. They have group meetings, and I volunteered there. That's what happened. So I started volunteering there, and I've made friends best friends, that I consider today my best friends. And that was started in 2007, and or 2009, sorry. And anyway, and that's why I decided, I was like, okay, I'm volunteering, I'm doing these things, and we were trying to get our site going and update it. So I wrote that, and now I write an annual almanac for the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, Night Sky Almanac, that comes out every year and talks about what you can see in the sky and do. So that's something that I love doing. So the RASC has meant a lot to me.
I love that story. Okay, thank you so much for elaborating. Does anyone else have a question? Otherwise, I'm taking seconds. That doesn't seem right yet. Anybody? Okay, go ahead.
I was just wondering, what is it fair to sort of expect from a source? I've done some science journalism while I've been here, and I'm always sort of nervous about asking for too much background from a source, because I don't want them to I don't want to overburden them with explain this to me, but I'm not a scientist, I need a little bit of explanation. And I'm just wondering, in your experience, what's the best way to sort of find the balance there?
You could repeat that one too.
Oh,
I don't know why I'm doing this, but anyway, I am. So what can you expect from a source, especially in a specialized field like this, with regards to background and detail? How much can you expect from that source?
Ask away. They are happy to talk about it. And I'm a science journalist, but I don't understand everything. I read through the studies, and there are all these equations, and I'm like, nope, because I'm not a scientist. But then you ask them to explain that. They're happy to explain it. So absolutely, and honestly, the odd time I've experienced people who are grumpy, but it's rare. They will have, you have to say, basically explain it to me like I'm 5, because our readers need to understand this. They're not scientists either. So don't be afraid to ask them to explain it at all. And I'm so glad you're doing science, yeah.
Yes, another question.
Yeah, I have a question. So you mentioned that you think it's a good idea to include diverse sources in your story. You mentioned that there's a database for this. But I was wondering, if it's a print story, people are not necessarily going to see that this is a diverse voice. And I think that it's a little inappropriate if the story isn't about these things to be a gay scientist.
Yeah.
Even though that is an integral part of their identity and perhaps informs their work that they're doing. So what's the balance to strike there?
Yeah, so she was asking if, how to include diverse voices in stories, but if they're in print, people don't know that this is necessarily a person of color or an LGBTQ plus person. So, how do you do that? The fact is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You don't need to identify them as that. But to have their voice in it is what matters, is to have their experience, because people aren't necessarily going to, that Black astronomer or that Indigenous business person. It's just really important to have that voice. You don't have to identify them necessarily.
Yes.
Hi. So I was wondering, it seems like I'm getting the kind of impression that inherently, as a Black woman who is starting out in a field that they feel kind of underrepresented, if that's another form of kind of inherent activism, within yourself, an advocate for yourself, or for more people like yourself to be involved in your industry, and if that's true, how that affected your career decisions, I guess.
So she was asking how, if I wasn't being represented, starting off my career, I wasn't represented, and not seeing that representation, did that spur me on to do any other activism, and did it inspire me to do other forms? I've talked to, what I have done is I've talked to students before who are looking to break into journalism, not even necessarily science journalism, and I mean, it was mainly for me. What I want to do is I want to bring those diverse voices to my stories. Not so much, I haven't really done a lot with journalism. For example, speaking here, I think this is amazing, and I'm so honored to be here. But it did affect me in the sense that it made me open my eyes and take a look around. Here it's way more diverse than it was when I came, when I was here. And I think at the time, like I told you, that story was in, I think he came up with 7 students in all the journalism program at the time. That rings a bell. I think that was it. So I'm so happy to see this. But one of the things that I like talking about is that it's about letting kids, it starts at the young age, about letting them know that this is a career path for them, because sometimes you don't think that way. And culturally, and I'm part of this as well, become a lawyer, become a doctor. That's what my grandmother was disappointed that I was becoming. I went into journalism because she wanted me, guy on East Side, you gotta be a doctor or a journalist or a lawyer. So it's about letting them know at a young age that this career is something that they can do, that is open to them. And that's something that is important to me, is to talking to little kids too about that.
Okay, well, thank you for all of your questions, and most of all, thank you to Nicole. I've got a little gift bag for you here, and just thank you so much. I really love that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We can have a break, and if you have questions about your final assignment and our last broadcast day, you can ask me, or you can go to your labs. But I'll stick around for another 15 minutes or so if you have questions. But we'll give Nicole a chance to gather her stuff and leave. And if you guys need to have a break, that's fine too.